Welcome everyone to YouTube Masterclass. This semester, if you're signed up for Masterclass in film, this is the film study class. It's on auteur or director with impact of style with his own fingerprint on his authorship of every frame. It is an auteur, someone that defines rules of the making of the film by their own characteristics as a director that have been seen by the critical eye or the spectrum of viewers out there. And I was just looking through, and this is a Harvard Coursera class, but it's also for units at Calarts or USC, which they're all saying these master classes can conduit these units. And I think we'll have 16 classes on the subject of D.W.Griffith, and we'll talk it into the ground by the time we're done. So we all have pretty much the ground floor on D.W.Griffith and how we can approach the medium, knowing about his style. I was once asked if he was really doing a class about, or worth doing a class about, or if you really needed to know him to get by in society, if these are things you really need to know. And the answer is probably not really. I mean, if you're a film student, I say you should know it just so you know about the history of film. And the history of race criticism is important to film studies. And since we're in film studies, it's very important not just to go with the racial studies, because we could beat that to death with the, oh, no races get along, so what are we going to do approach. But what we're trying to do now is look at the iconography of the signs and signifiers and how flawed they are in some cases as compared to the signs and signifiers of, say, True Heart Sushi, which are non-threatening except in this kind of pot boiler that emerged under the surface of it. And I think what's really wild about these short films I'm looking at is there are actually some short films about D.W. Griffith that some directors, even before Tin Pan Alley, had seen him making a film and then destroying it for a lovely couple that were watching at these Nickelodeons. And the Nickelodeons really evolved because they were places that you just looked in these goggles and cranked the film and saw these short films. And some of Griffith's were after that, because that was in 1898 when they had these theatrical Nickelodeons playing these bigger ones. Griffith got the idea to make movies, but he had to be a stuntman first, and that's why he's in that weird bird movie, because he was a stuntman to make it look like he was being carried by a giant bird. And here we are in 1909, and we're back to the list, and we've seen throughout the list of the other pages that we skipped a few of them. And that is because they were about Griffith as a director. Now, the interesting thing about Griffith as a director back then was is they were reintroducing him after he'd already been kind of popular at Tin Pan Alley. But when Edwin S. Porter saw how he could edit so calmly and smoothly, when he asked him how he did that, he would reply, well, I studied Edwin S. Porter, and then they met each other because they were both working on a film. And Porter said, I bet if I give this guy a break, he'll make the Great Train Robbery version of the Civil War, and that'll bring us all to modernity with the cinema. Like, it needs to explain our last big blunder in history, which the Civil War was 50 years probably before Porter was discussing it on screen, and that Griffith was already sending up slavery and sending up the Klan and all these pictures that he was making in the silent era before he tried making Birth of a Nation, which he had planned out around the time that he was a stunt extra and was looking for a way to develop this story called The Klansman, proving that he was always on the side of the bad side on that one. And it doesn't really make sense when he tries to defend that film against racism. It's a very strange feeling that he thinks the whole thing is sci-fi all of a sudden, and that the stereotypes are okay because sci-fi uses stereotypes because they're aliens or something. I don't know what he's getting at, but we're talking about these films that were about the making of films, and they were already praising Griffith from just his short films. Now, he made one called The Necklace, which I've seen, and it's like the earrings of Madame D. It's that Guy de Maupassant story of like how the jewels get stolen and how Griffith tells the stories about this lady getting stolen from, noticing they're gone, and then getting them back from her husband's female lover who they'd been given to by the thief or whatever. And it's a story of how the jewels get passed on. We had one kind of like that, only we made it the MacGuffin of the jewels getting passed on as though it were part of the story. And I remember that distinctly about a really good novel I read recently. And I got to admit, I have personal power in some of the industry because I'm a WGA member, Writers Guild of America member, and I'm pretty much at the top of my sortie where I can get to in the Writers Guild, and it's a very top position, and it's to run their social media. And I know there are other managers for the social media at the Writers Guild, but it's availability to make friends come back like from a long time of busyness on all our parts, and that's why we don't call each other more often. But I think even Lorenzo Minetti was taking jobs at the Writers Guild, and the Writers Guild was offering some pretty high-paying positions, but I'm in this really tense spot where I can assume I can look at all the Griffith screenplays. And so does this make my search engine deeper? Not really, because we're just getting to a corner and weed on the search engine. And really, I don't mark the demarcation of all things Griffith. I just happen to capture the USC chair, which is interesting because D.W.Griffith was one of the founders of USC when he was setting up and establishing Hollywood. When he did, around the time of Judith of Bethulia, he was setting up a studio system that they would use with MGM, Paramount, Warner, Fox, and RKO. The top 5 cinemas would all model themselves after even a cinema like UA, which was modeling after them, which was a studio system, a studio kind of film, the standard made studio, standard mode of representation from the mode of representation that was primitive, that Porter had to invent the modern cut in Fireman, the edit of the Fireman going to the top level of the ladder. And I was thinking about if Edwin Porter had to do it today and a superhero went up the ladder, then they would edit it differently because the superhero could just be all in one frame going up the ladder. It wouldn't have to wait for the guy to climb. Like, to make it look like the perspective of Match on Action is when he gets to the next scene from the other perspective. That's what's so amazing about that editing. That editing really started it all, that American Fireman edit, where he's climbing up. He climbs up this, like, to review, he climbs up this ladder. And as he's going, he climbs and climbs and climbs. And then in the next shot, he's still climbing. And then he gets to where he already was when he was climbing a second ago. So now you trim the two footages together to match in the middle. And oh, what a glorious effect. Now it looks like he's directly climbing the ladder, all in sequence of the physical time and duration that it takes to climb the ladder instead of climbing it twice because it was filmed from 2 cameras. And thus, editing was born. And out of the studio system, you could make an edited film because they were kind of like, you know, in a weird way, they were factory assemblage type movies. They were like bric-a-brac that you would, you know, like in modern times when Chaplin's like turning the nuts and bolts on this conveyor belt. You could say these were like conveyor belt movies because they all had a certain house style according to the studio, and the studio system was partly brought ahead by D.W.Griffith, who kept trying to take his UA movies to the studios he was signing producers into. And then we all know that Thomas Ince died aboard the ship of William Randolph Hearst. And it's interesting how Griffith and William Randolph Hearst kind of coexisted in this universe, but didn't really ever sink it, because William Randolph Hearst was kind of a liberal, and D.W. Griffith, although he was a right-wing communist in a weird way, because we'll talk about that later when he admits to being a communist later in his career. This seems to be like the blacklist setting itself up, and he's telling him, no, don't admit to it like me and Chaplin did. Chaplin got deported, and I'm in jail. I'm serving a life sentence in prison. But they're only going to let me out for World War II. I mean, they're only going to let him out for World War II. So he's not trying to bifurcate the fact that he's trying to slow down his time in the Army, because he already knows the Army's going to be scary. And this time he gets shell-shocked because he sees too much of the Holocaust, and it totally bewilders him, and it makes him like PTSD'd from then on. And he's already made the struggle in 1930 when he's about to be turned in for communism. It's weird, though, because the struggle, as we've talked about, is about an Alcoholics Anonymous type scenario where the guy is such a bad drinker that he needs to slowly stop drinking, and the people around him can keep drinking, that he's got to stop. And really, throughout the movie, he never beats his alcoholism. That is such a withdrawal movie. It's like Lost Weekend, almost. It's a wild movie, The Struggle. It's almost like the reefer madness of alcohol. But what's weird is this Griffith hated reefer madness when he finally saw it, because unlike The Struggle, which is about a human interest film more than alcohol, it's about a male melodrama, a guy that can't seem to get anything figured out, and he drinks himself to death practically, and then wonders if he's ever going to drink again. And it's a sound film, so it has all these sounds of like Fear and Loathing type soundtrack, where there's like loud noises going by, and then there's cars, and he's just staring at this glass of beer like he's in love with it. And it's this long take and has all these sound effects. And Griffith's still showing off. Like Abraham Lincoln has more problems as a film because it's another one of his racial conspiracy films. Although this time we can kind of tell that there's some sentiment towards the African American, for one thing. And this is really going to trip you out. In the film Abraham Lincoln, there's actually African American actors in it instead of blackface. Now, don't quote me on this, because I've heard there's versions where they spliced back in the blackfacers, but I'm not kidding you that in several of the books on D.W.Griffith, they announced that African Americans were actually in the film Abraham Lincoln. Now, they would have had to have been, because it was a sound film. It was a sound film, and they use African American voices for the voices of the black people. I mean, it's like Griffith saying, we're going to use black people, but they're going to become slaves again, and this time they're going to be kind of this cult of black people that rise to freedom, and it'll be because of Abraham Lincoln's edict only, and it will only just overshadow his death, since we covered all that in Birth of a Nation. It's covering all the things that Birth of a Nation didn't, in this sort of protest way to Birth of a Nation again, like he's apologizing, like the Oxford World History says. He's always atoning or apologizing or recharging because of the unanimous vote of his most infamous film, Birth of a Nation, being this dismal flop because of its racism, and that he's been hanging in the balance of buying everybody weed at the jazz club and slowly losing his shirt at the movies, which if Intolerance didn't lose his shirt over everything, nothing else would. And that's why I think Way Down East, when you get to 1920, when you get to Way Down East after Broken Blossoms, which is really where we left off. And there's some other short films we'll go through in a minute, but in Way Down East is an interesting film because it's such a depressing family drama. It's like a family drama where nothing goes right. It's like the whole time they're persecuting Lillian Gish's character, you can really see her as maybe being the Messiah complex of the Griffith movie, because she takes everything on martyrdom, like Joan of Arc. Like she's hurt by a guy, which already makes me not want to watch the film, because now I know it's depressing. He gets away with it, impregnates her, gets her together with another guy, and he finds out she's pregnant, and they'll throw a scandal on her and kick her out. Now, this takes place over a long duration of explaining what the family life is like, and I think that Way Down East was taken as a joke by Buster Keaton in Our Hospitality, who did the Hetfields and the McCoys thing, which is kind of what's going on in Way Down East, but not really. It's like this dastardly evil guy has got to affect the lives of these innocent, like, Mormon, Quaker, missionary types that are orthodox about everything, But they get fooled by the dastardly guy, or he holds one of them hostage, or both. And he holds the woman hostage the whole time. He's like, if you tell anybody anything like this, I'll kill you. And Griffith makes these like on-screen performances of this guy just like jeering at the big star Lillian Gish. And she's such a big star that she's more powerful than Griffith, but she trusts him as a director to make the most provocative movie he can, like he always does, of her getting taken advantage of and thrown to the dogs. That was partly her idea of a setup for a Perils of Pauline kind of, let's make it tragic comedy, where she gets hurt, but she picks herself up and saves the day. To these like serial movies, almost like Gish had a plan to be the Messiah complex of every martyrdom sacrifice for Griffith's sins, and that Griffith is always trying to atone or apologize for Birth of a Nation seems a weird vantage point from trying to get rid of that film from your mind when thinking about him, because he's always thinking about that film in relation to his films and how he can do away with anything that was even seeming like content from what backfired on him and by now was a total mistake. But by 1930, he had done another review that's available on the short films of D.W.Griffith, where he talks in sound about the recoming of Birth of a Nation and how they've tried to sell enough tickets, wire it in sound, and that the Klan took over at that time, again in 1930, Griffith was unaware of, except that he saw a Klan parade. And all he could say was, well, they're going to win it over. And that's the reason Birth is a movie, is because it's so powerful and captivating and even controversial. And he's kind of making a jerk of himself by saying that there's a point to the movie again after all those years of apologizing and atoning, and now he can do sound film. And he's doing Abraham Lincoln, which is kind of, in ways, the only African American racial film he made that was the least racist, that didn't really bother even today's spectators. They could berile it as some kind of Spielberg fascination, even though the sound is so wicked that's restored of the African Americans coming in the slave ship, but they're singing these tunes of like Moses, and they know that one day Abraham Lincoln, like he has promised, is going to alleviate the slaves, like he is going to redeem the slaves. And so he sets out the Emancipation Proclamation, and a lot of them escape to the North immediately. And that's a point I think we all miss on our Civil War history, is that Abraham Lincoln point where he emancipated, proclamated, and a lot of black people just got out of Dodge and went north of the Mason-Dixon line. And I didn't mention that there was a lot that did that, but a lot of the survivors were the ones that weren't rescued. They were the ones that escaped right as the Emancipation Proclamation was hitting. And that's a point I've missed out on a lot of my Griffith exams, is that actually this Abraham Lincoln experiment turns out to be a rather well-designed race in terms of question, although it seems that some of the African Americans seem placated. The main desire for freedom is expressed in a way that's expressed later in Spielberg's Abraham Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis. Although I prefer Spielberg's, because Spielberg has this human side of Abraham where he's not just the savior, but he's the sinner. And he's not just the one figuring out philosophy, but philosophy is eating away at him to write the Emancipation Proclamation and to live by it and to stand by it and fight it in the Congress and Senate, that he's going to stand by these rules of setting free the African American, and that all are created equal. And the Gettysburg Address is the one that we miss too, where Lincoln comes to say before the battle, not too close to the battle, but what he wants to happen in that battle, to crush the heel of the South, who is dominating over the African Americans and keeping them locked in, treasure chests that they spent so much on, that now we can't just relieve them because then they have no money. But that's the idea. Our enemy has no money. We've bankrupted them from slavery. Everybody gets a piece. But in this Griffith version, it's more like the John Ford Abraham Lincoln, young Mr. Lincoln, where he learns to read by himself in a cabin that has slaves of his own. And these are really sensible issues. And I know that Abraham Lincoln rose to presidency because he split the third party vote, and no one had voted for a Republican yet because it was a new party. And it was a different kind of republicanism. It was kind of left-wing in the sense that we have equality in this early form of republicanism. And that Abraham Lincoln eventually thought the same thing. A lot of the Northerners thought that the African Americans were being hurt in slavery, which was weird because they'd spend so much money on them. They would think that they would give them some of the money and entice them to want to work and double their efforts. I don't know. I mean, it's still slavery, and it's still wrong, and it's still racially marked as condemned. I can see why the NAACP didn't condemn Abraham Lincoln, because they're sitting there going, wait, didn't we just hear Griffith say he wants the Klan to march, and now he's got this young Mr. Lincoln winning this trial as a lawyer that he's read himself into being, and cover up for these two kids that almost start a riot. They do start a riot, and the riot comes against him, and Abraham Lincoln defends him in court, gets him off the hook. He's considered a hero, even though the townspeople are going to lynch the guys that he got off the hook. He's still considered a hero of lawyerism, and he's the only thing they can think of to run as president. And that's young Mr. Lincoln, and that's Abraham Lincoln too. And then the Spielberg one focuses on when he's writing the Emancipation Proclamation and how he's getting ready the Gettysburg Address to deliver his final speech. It's like him preparing for all his speeches, and how even this uneducated, self-read guy, comes to terms with the fact that they shouldn't be putting the hurt on anybody to do the work, because they'll do the work They thought they were doing it without hurting them, like there'd been some kind of a cooperation. Yeah, right. The North probably turned a blind eye for as long as they could, but you know what? That wasn't really their fault because they didn't think they stood a chance against the barbarians that held lock and key all these slaves. And so you look at a film like today, like Django Unchained or something, with this hero that's fighting his way back to save his girlfriend and save his future wife and to blow up some plantations. And in that one, there's an interesting portrayal of the African American archetype, and that is the Stepin Fetchit character. Now, we discussed Stepin Fetchit in John Ford's Judge Priest, where Will Rogers is killed. Unfortunately, there's a black racist problem with that film too, and I don't know. I don't think John Ford intended that because this was kind of a famous actor from that time who had done like spectacles on TV, and he'd done like various archetypes, but he was Will Rogers' guy, so he would be on his comedy team, and it was a real racist relationship. And so you see Samuel L. Jackson in this like Django Unchained movie, and we'll get to Hateful Eight in a minute, but in Samuel L. Jackson in Django Unchained mood, he's like this house bunny. He's helping the white guy out. Leonardo DiCaprio is helping him out. He's covering for him. He knows he only has a good spot if he joins with DiCaprio. And we'll talk about this next semester too, as we talk about directors, and we're going to talk about Tarantino then, and see if we can get anywhere on the Tarantino mystery of what's really behind the inner workings of his film, other than like the modern problem of a man in crisis fighting his way through the will to power to maintain the chalice of the gods, you know, or whatever seems to be Tarantino's being for that moment. I think there's a lot of redemption in the Hateful Eight towards race because Samuel L. Jackson is like this John Wayne type, but he's like the black John Wayne, you can actually say, more than like the guy from Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, who was Black Pompey, or whatever. This guy that was, well, the guy Pompey is not quite as John Wayne-like, even though he's John Wayne-like, and they don't know if he really killed William Marvin. The black guy might have even killed him. He was there shooting. So they all might have shot Liberty Valance, is my theory. Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, and the Pompey. But this black guy Samuel L. Jackson plays is already cooler than John Wayne, and he's only bringing inwards out to know that they're this gang of filthy stooges that were like born in the lower classes and destined to be racist even to a black sheriff. And it kind of takes the hinges off of a movie like Blazing Saddles and kind of mediates it into this kind of like past kitsch joke, because the people in this kind of exploitation setting in Hateful Eight of this theatrical but kind of exploitation like film is looking like it's going to collapse in everything, and it may, but that the characteristics of the racist ones were all of the criminal, that most of the uses in Tarantino's movies of the N-word is for the criminal, is like saying that in Birth of a Nation it's not offensive when the blacks call the other blacks the N-word, and it's an offensive way of using it, and it's spelled offensively. And I think we all know the differences between the way it's spelled, and that still white people really shouldn't be saying the N-word in public because they're going to attract to themselves as like this kind of inegalitarian, anti-American or anti-Abraham Lincoln type thing. And Griffith, I like how he goes both ways. I like how he goes, the Klan is wrong, the Klan is right. The Klan is wrong, the Klan is right. Like he has the determinacy to say, not even, and he is sort of like inducted in, and boo hiss on Griffith for taking it too far and into the hands of divisive action to see what can stabilize the South of Birth of a Nation. I think it's wild that in history the South is always winning until you get to Gone with the Wind. Now that Gone with the Wind is a movie where the South loses and gets turned into a wasteland, let me hear you say North won the war. North won the war. Yeah, so really Gone with the Wind and all of its racism is against the Southern view in the sense that it was destroyed, although it was this immaculate ideal utopia of a place where even the slaves got along with the slave owners, right? Supposedly. In this scene where Mammy's calling the character of the main character, and sorry for that word, that's a racist word, but that was her name in Gone with the Wind, the black lady, the African American lady, and she was played by a real African American, and these Abraham Lincoln guys were real African Americans. I don't know who got off using the first African Americans. It was probably Cabin in the Sky by Vincente Minnelli, and I think it was a musical in 1933, but Abraham Lincoln had already been made, but hear me out. So these associations that we have with Klansmen being good or bad all come to a head in the silent films where the Klansmen are usually bad, and then suddenly the Klansman gets into his head. He develops it into a 300-page script, the one that he's going to beat Cabiria with. We're not ever sure if box office results for either of them ever came in. If there was either a huge crowd at one and nobody at the next, and then it just beamed out of history and almost fell obsolete in some archive somewhere, got brushed aside. But Cabiria is a heck of a good film, and it's all made under the auspice that all men can equally play in an adventure. But that there are only Italians in the film, I don't know how they get so many people, because they have tons and tons of these guys that are later from like gangster families, whatever. They're in all these sword and sandal movies that are being forgotten of the silent era. And here's Griffith going, if I can make it to Intolerance, I may be broke, but I've got some favors to cash in on. And he never cashed in on Oscar Michaud's favors, and Oscar Michaud had offered him several times some kind of recompense for helping his movies so many times, even though their movies didn't turn out the same way, now did they? That Oscar Michaud has a greater sense of standing out with Within Our Gates in the 1919 release by United Artists, and it had to be because that was the only studio that would take an African American film which has the real African Americans in it. Again, it's not blackface. This is before Abraham Lincoln, so we have a black guy casting black actors on partly on Griffith's time, because he wants to be part of the Directors Guild and help all the filmmakers without wages to come to the top and be at the top and eat with the top and drink with the top. And he's trying to get all these marginalized filmmakers. Well, Oscar Michaud's Within Our Gates becomes this huge hit for everybody. Even white people are going to see it, and even racist white people are going to see it, and they're like, this is an amazing movie. I mean, some of them can think the pastor, who's an evil guy who's behind the scenes shady in their church, and they're all getting ready to kill him if he gives a shady sermon. But the pastor guy is like a racist stereotype, even for Michaud, but since Michaud is hamming it up importantly, is this guy's the sellout. He's selling out these wanting to be black people that are African Americans that are in the church, and the church is ill-defined, and his church is really the church of the devil, and it's all this craziness about how the people don't really believe it, that the devil should win, and then next thing you know, there's this big gun battle outside the church that goes down the street and on into Detroit and on into Chicago, and the gun battle goes blazing all over the streets of Detroit and Chicago. And you see like this guy in the middle pointing back and forth to see who's shooting, and he's like got the newspaper, and he's sinking between the crossfire of bullets. It's a wild movie. I mean, it has like 5 different edit positions for the gunfight that are recurring, and then 5 new ones, and it's like this action film. And it's like you could see where John McTiernan would get a gun battle from this kind of a movie, an action-packed movie. And then it's got the romance situation. I thought it was weird that Body and Soul had, and there was a sound version of that too, and I'm not sure if the sound version was Michaud. It might have been, but the silent version is the same as the sound film. Paul Robeson is one of those bad priests to take advantage of a widow of the husband he killed, like Night of the Hunter style. And if you don't believe me that this is some kind of dark cinema, that they're making these dark views, and that Michaud wants to make them about African American people, not necessarily to scare everyone, just to give them roles that they've never had before, because without him there would have been no roles for African Americans until Abraham Lincoln, and what a mess that would have been, because here's the guy who's like funding the black cinema, but he doesn't want to, reign over a negative impetus because he's already effed up and made this racist, like, NAACP banned movie. And when he brought it back in 1930, it seemed a bit sellout, but it also could have been the studio system he created, bringing back out things that he never got all this money for, so they wanted to re-release it. Who knows? The studios at that time might have been beleaguering a Klansman contract just for D.W.Griffith to spring back with one more chance to recuperate his money, which it said he never did recuperate his money because the film kept being banned as soon as the Klan would come out of the underground and start revealing that they wanted to be all, made up for this movie and be at this movie that's about them. And this time they got Griffith to make it pro-Klan. And really, where else can you see a movie that's pro-Klan? I mean, we talk all the time about these left-wing politics, and I'm not so sure we want to see slavery. And it goes back to the question, do we need to know D.W. Griffith? But where do you get the point of view, not that you want it, that the Klansmen were actually the saving grace of the South and needed to happen to save the South from total ruination, which probably is true. Then so suddenly now we're sitting here at the dilemma going, well, you've made them all look good to me, and really the history book makes them out to look bad because they're like fighting for the South. They want the Confederacy, and the Confederacy ultimately will destroy America because of separatist politics that would only divide more less or more marginally as before, when states are making their own laws anyway by the end of the Civil War. So state sovereignty turned it around and said the state makes its own rules, but not to compete with the other states, because the other states make their own rules and comply by them by the state. And by that time, it was completely illegal to even have slaves. So Django Unchained is kind of true, because by the time it was illegal to even have slaves and the Civil War was well underway, which lasted almost 14 years, and that wasn't brought up in any of my paperwork, was how long it lasted, and that's the most obvious. And we're saying, from 1870 to 1885, and then the aftermath lasted until 1895, when they closed the frontier and all the cowboys came home, in that 10-year period between when cattlers and cattle rustlers were getting out on the prairie lands that the pioneers had paved to go to Utah. Yeah, we told the whole story. But there's so much left out. Like, why does the special edition of Birth of a Nation show a Mormon movie that has so many Klansmen in it that are getting the Klansman outfit and figuring out how to make it? Those Klansman outfits were on those Mormon preachers before there was even an actual Klan rising, although I've heard the Klan goes back even farther. Then Birth of a Nation says it was introduced towards the end of the war, and under my circumspect negotiation, I think Klansmen were fighting on the South in the Confederacy. The same guys that were going to be Klansmen later, but they were probably already Klansmen by then, because they were like Minutemen vigilantes that were fighting the North. Well, if African Americans were their enemy, one reason it was because it was free to be an African American in the North. And so now they're fighting against the North. So now they're fighting against the African Americans again, even though they spent millions of dollars on them and they're losing all their money. And here's the problem that I'm learning, is not many African Americans were really involved in the Civil War, because the free ones from the North were already meant to keep the jobs in the industry with the women. And I'm not saying they were really racist in the North, but they had to cover jobs even for the American Army that would have taken actual African Americans up to the North and had them working busy on industry, instead of losing them in a battle to these guys that are going to shoot first at the Black Army. Now, I know there's movies like Glory and other movies too that show like these black troops. In fact, Spike Lee has a very convincing one called Miracle at St. Anna. I'm not going to argue that there was that troop that found the Helen statue and found the whole meaning of like what it was to be like set free as a war hero, and that like they were war heroes. And I liked how they were all black, which there was hardly any whites in their regiment. But this was World War II, not the Civil War. You see how I tricked you? Like, if this was the Civil War, we'd all be going, beleaguer me to ask, but where's the Klansman at? And we've been asking that about Civil War movies ever since, because Birth of a Nation effed it up so bad with the exaggerated Klansmen, with the government putting that scene in. I hope that was the government that put that scene in, so I can blame them forever for ruining Griffith's film, and he probably thought he'd make more money if he established with the government that everybody'd want to see this under their regime. And that Woodrow Wilson was a grand dragon of the Klan. He's already thinking, let's push it a mile on the Klan ending. And Griffith's thinking, well, it was called the Klansman originally, and the Klan lost in one version, and the Klan won in one version. And they're saying for me to side with the South in this war thing. And Gone with the Wind still sides with the South, but the South lose the war. Now, in Birth of a Nation, the South lose the war, but then they pick it up and fight back and pretty much gain back their territory and recover their slaves in a way. Now they're not slaves, they're just vagrants that they employ for less bread than they would have given them as a slave. I mean, the slavery was not over just because the war was over. And the things that happen in the South now to punish white or black men for these atrocities, pretty much done, except there's still racial tension in the South. Why? Because they always believed that they lost all their money and almost went bankrupt, then had to rejoin the Union to have state sovereignty, though, to a fix. But that the Klansmen came back at the end and fought back and won was kind of an addition to and revisionist history, and that to me seems like the wildest revisionist history in film history, except for the movie America, where George Washington had a Native American slave, which may be true, but still seems revisionistic, especially about how deep the miscegenation laws were, even embedded in Masonry, which kind of wants you to do kind to kind, the rich to rich, the white to white, the black to black. It's like have everything be equal, but everything be within its own realm. And I'm not saying the Masons are right or wrong, and that the Masons didn't have something to do with coming up with Klansmen, and that the Klansmen weren't war heroes. They were usually war heroes, and then they'd fought for the South, and then if they became Klansmen later and some little kid scared someone with a blanket, I'm offended by that, but it's a part of American history, so I'm just going to have to take the background and say everybody was fighting a war for a reason they knew it was, whether it was slavery or not. There might have been a war, there probably would have been a civil war where one side had more money and wanted to claim all the rest of the money that was being seceding from them to start their own sovereignty. And here's the Civil War without the chip of the race card of slavery, and you still have it brother versus brother. I mean, let's just pretend it's in today's Civil War of like oil fields versus like empty grasslands that no one curates. And you want to side with both sides, but you can't side with either because there's something immoral about tearing a hole in the earth and pumping it for oil, or is there? Maybe that's what the earth intended our technology to eventually reach the point of doing. But no, it's a zit on the earth, these oil rigs. And we're just going to leave land the way undeveloped. Well, land undeveloped is a wasteland. I mean, by the time the sharecroppers were coming down from the north, that D.W.Griffith evidently didn't write about, but some were within our gates, actually, and they were coming to give land and food and relief to the south from the north, where they still had tons of supplies, and they'd bring soldiers if they needed to, but the war was over, so by now the soldiers on both sides have already realigned and rejoined the U.S. Army, which is something we didn't talk about in the book, because in the U.S. Army it had the racists and non-racists alike, and that's one of the reasons we like the fact that there's those World War I movies like Hearts of the World that really show how African Americans and white people are basically on the same level when it comes to fighting the war. World War II. And these are all things we get by the time of World War II, but had there not been the sanctity between Griffith's relationship and Michaud's, there may have been a way bigger split, because already Michaud had movies only to show for the blacks, and that's fine. If he only wanted all the blacks to watch them, that's fine. You get no problem from me here. I like watching every movie I can see, but if someone limits me from watching a movie, I'll take that limit very seriously and be like, this is why I shouldn't see it. But that he made those movies for United Artists all along, and that Body and Soul even had its own sound film, and it was still Paul Robeson, and you're thinking, how does he do this for another film? And it's that creature gone bad, instinct that is going to take advantage of this girl. And here we get back to way down east where we're seeing this guy take advantage of this woman, and he leaves her with the weak guy, and he's got them all under hostage, and then he convinces the family to come over for dinner, and then he keeps this Lillian Gish chick in check. And then it goes to that whole ice flow scene I was describing where they did the stunt double and they had Lillian Gish look like she was laying on it. It was the craziest special effects since Birth of a Nation. Has that scene where that little girl gets thrown off a cliff, and then it cuts to like this doll of a little girl like running into the cliff and dying. You can kind of tell it's a dummy, but that's how it would have really looked anyway. It gets kind of scary with the violence aestheticized. And why were they aestheticizing violence early on anyway in cinema? What is the deal? Even the Sword and Sandal epics, even that Inferno that comes out in 1911, even the story of the Kelly Gang, that we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle to reframe. So the longest surviving film I know of is Inferno, where the whole thing survives, pretty much. Parts of it are missing, but the whole thing survived in like this hour-and-a-half long fashion, and how they ever made it, and where they went to make it at the Vatican, and the catacombs, and all these things are bursting before you. Hexen's another spectacle that keeps changing for, the version of, and there are versions of Birth of a Nation, but none of them have this sort of sympathy that some of the Northerners had of the South losing all their money on slavery, so I won't deny that, but that they were trying to win the war when their money supply had drained probably made them pretty bitter. And I think that's why the Gettysburg attack, which the North won barely, was so favored on the North side, because the South were after revenge and wanted their slaves back, and had heard things about how the South had fallen into disrepair. And then they were made to give him 40 acres and a mule, and now we're back to Spike Lee and his Miracle at St. Anna. Well, this Miracle at St. Anna film is so good that you're going to want to see it 10 times more than you see The Birth of a Nation, 100 times more. I mean, the programming of style is so stylistic of Spike Lee that by now it's like a paintbrush, and he's got a kind of these impressions and a little bit of expressiveness, but impressions of his African-American elders that kind of came from an era that wanted to fight World War II. And they're fighting this Haramask, and there was this whole segregated regime, but that they fought World War II together with white and black is true in some cases, but in some cases in these ground troops, they didn't want any white guys going at the black because they thought then they'd either target one or the other as the ultimate one to hit, right? Some excuse they're using in war jargon to keep the troops segregated, and they give this black troop a really hard mission that they didn't want a really hard mission, but they didn't mind going on it because they all basically survive. And it's interesting because maybe only one or two of them gets killed, and there are these moments that are Saving Private Ryan-ish, but then Spike Lee kind of has this like metaphysical element of this living statue creature that's going to be like this Clash of the Titans type battle where she'll turn everyone to stone or freeze time or whatever Hera's head does when they take it out of the bag. And then they got this guy's an actual dude's head in a bag as the enemy. It was like these black guys that were really strong in the army and had trained in the army, African Americans, and then they had to fight these like quizzical German troops that were reminding them of kind of the days of the Confederacy, only worse. It was like extinction of mankind. Because you got to remember one thing about slavery is they didn't really want their slaves to die in the South, because then they'd have to pay another $1 million to replace it with another slave. So they didn't want their slaves to die, which is why I think when they started hurting them and molesting them or whatever, that's when the North had to come and put their moral foot down. Not that the North had ever done anything wrong to the Native Americans or anything, and that Buffalo Bill wasn't squatting in his apartment homeless while going on for vaudeville while the last Indians were going down in history in the North as being hanged just like everybody at what they're trying to make vaudeville into the Grand Guignol. And Buffalo Bill's Indians may have looked good in Robert Altman's film, but in the reality, the North was treating the Native Americans like they were an extinct project too. And I don't want to get into the fact that they had licensed most of the African Americans not for battle. But Spike Lee says whether or not they should have gone to battle or not because of their minority numbers, they did. They were heroes. They saved the day in World War II, and everybody got together for a few minutes at the end of the war and thanked each other, and that was the last they were allowed to talk to each other. They were headed into Jim Crow laws. Everything was segregated, separate but equal. We're talking no effect from even Birth of a Nation or against Birth of a Nation. Probably could have stopped the rule of racism, which probably would have been worse if the NAACP hadn't taken a stand against the Birth of a Nation. So I can respect those critics that have an opposition to what they may feel is not the right thing, even though all these other filmmakers, when they're making films about the Civil War, it's all about the South. Ever since Birth of a Nation made it that way, it's about the South, South, South. And Griffith was already gearing up for that to be the cinematic side because his father was a general of the South. He was basically the Confederate atheist guy I keep talking about. He had slaves but didn't want them to die. And the North had blown his plantation to smithereens, blown up some of the slaves. And he couldn't handle it. He went to spy on the North and ended up fighting for the North. Griffith's dad, but he came back to the South as a hero of a Southern general and was alive through the Civil War, so that attests for him. Not totally. That shows that the whole South wasn't killed, and that some of the racist ones were still alive. But Griffith, to honor his father, he had that whole script in his head that he didn't know was going to melt down into the waxworks of yesterday of too stereotypical and not really the form that we see it in. And now Way Down East is so expressive and so aglow with expressionism that by now these things that are going off the waterfall is part of Griffith's last-minute rescue, an intolerance, or to get the guy off the hangman's noose at the end, just barely. They run out of time almost and accidentally hang that guy, but they take him off the noose in the last-minute rescue of the governor coming to stop the hanging. And there's last-minute rescue in Broken Blossoms, but it falls through and they all die. Except the Irish boxer who goes back to work and he's glad everybody's dead. But Way Down East has this sort of exaggerated style that takes us into the romance of melodrama. But the romance is all quashed until the very end when the guy saves her from going over the waterfall on ice, which is a dummy used at the very end, and he reaches down and grabs it. And there's this way in our hospitality that they do this kind of over the waterfall thing where Buster Keaton's doing real stunt effects and going back and forth through a waterfall to bring someone back to safety, and they're all getting soaked in this Hetfield and McCoy's Our Hospitality. And I see it coming from that Way Down East scene where they're all going over the waterfall and then he saves her at the last minute, and it's only Buster Keaton would find that a way to make that into a humorous conundrum. And what makes it kind of humorous is the feminist movement is kind of quashed by this idea of male masculinity, even when females are writing that is that they depend on the male to save the day. They can't face the male physically, even though they're been through all this stot anger and overwhelming pain. And, these women are thrown to the wolves in these movies, and it's we know Mary Pickford wants to be thrown to the alligators in her movie with all the kids, and she's running away from the alligators. And it's one of those Mary Pickford movies, and they're well, it's like Perils of Pauline. You put them in these positions where it's it keeps the woman down and it keeps the woman subservient, but then she breaks out and saves the day, so it's kind of feminist. But the feminists are arguing that the Anastasia complex is too much, where these characters are getting beat to a pulp and acting like nothing's happening. And acting like nothing's happening can be a way to turn your eye on it. And so it's really saying that women all get treated bad, which is a fair statement because they do, but that they win only on account of the other men is different in intolerance, because the woman brings the governor to save her husband, or gets the governor's friend, her husband's friend, to save him from the pretty noose. And pretty noose is pretty hate. And I don't like what you got me hanging from. All right, well, that was Masterclass for today. We sailed through some important issues on the D.W.Griffith bracket. I see another couple of short films to check out here. One's called Unseen Enemy, and it's about the physician's death orphans, his two adolescent daughters. their older brother is able to convert some of the doctor's small estate. Unseen Enemy. It's 15 minutes long. It's a one-reeler. Remember, a reel is 20 minutes and 2 reels is 40 minutes. And we did find out that Enoch Arden, the version they have on here, is only 33 minutes with both parts combined. It might be a little longer with both parts combined on the Biograph shorts. The Biograph was the company he was working for in the shorts department that was his own company and was away from the cinematograph versions of Edison's type. Brutal films of people either being made fun of that are dying, blown up, or just his complete lack of compassion for any living being when they showed the electrocution of the elephant. And I've seen these movies are interesting. The Love Flower we'll talk about next time we get together, because The Love Flower is one of the important films that we've kind of overlooked, and now that we've gotten to Orphans of the Storm, we say, hey, The Love Flower is right up here, and there's some others that we may look over again, like Did We Cover It Enough type films. And we saw nothing really from 1917, 1918 is Hearts of the World, Sally of the Sawdust. Then you have, 1919 with Broken Blossoms, and you have 1919 with Within Our Gates that Griffith's like the secret producer on. That doesn't excuse him from being secretive producer, from making these like atrocities about the South ruling over the blacks being a good thing, because I never thought that was a good thing. But in the outline he arrays in the film, he's convinced us that the Klan saved the South. And that in the history books they may have, but what's the point of showing that when we already knew that was going to be the only saving grace of the South, because it was the only military that even had any money left was the Klan, for standing up to the North, coming down and obliterating them, all because they beat their slaves. So they beat their slaves, so now everybody's getting killed. But it's a hard juncture to cross, because who knows who deserved what. All we know is that the North actually won. That Klansmen had to go underground several times. And when Birth of a Nation was first released, again, it was Woodrow Wilson. And here's this short film called The Long Road. And it doesn't say what it's about, but it looks like an interesting short film. And then you have this film called Man's Genesis, which is a thing about making movies, it looks like. Or no, it is kind of like this modern day telling of Adam and Eve. I don't know. It's just like Griffith had these religious themes in his films sometimes, and then he makes Money Mad, which I have seen, and that's the one that's kind of a Western and a one-reeler in the straight shooting kind of way for John Ford to see, where they kind of do this great train robbery type thing in Money Mad. And A Trap for Santa Claus, 1909. These are early films that Griffith's making in his career. 1908 for Money Mad, 1909 for A Trap for Santa Claus. And while Money Mad looked like one of those Western studios, Trap for Santa Claus looks like this real Santa Claus movie. And we'd never take into account that Griffith has these like themes of Americana that he's establishing as the very things he wants us to look forward to in film. This is A Girl in Her Trust, which is also an anti-racist film. It's a anti-KKK film, A Girl in Her Trust. It's where a girl doesn't want her slave to die, and that's when the slave saves the little girl. And it's actually called A Slave in Her Trust, been changed to A Girl in Her Trust. Very interesting that it wasn't a woman in her trust, because he does save a little girl, but the little girl admits that that wasn't her slave, it was her parents' slave. And anyway, they're all being freed right then anyway, right? That's why the barn's burning down. Thank you, North, for coming to free us. Anyway, it's a long debate. And The Last Deal is another one, and that we already talked to as being a poker film or a Monte Carlo type gambling hall that's illegal, and it's a real short film, and it's in 1910, and it's only like a minute long, and it's all that's surviving with some of these Griffith films. So before we go, we'll saddle up to these. Looks like this movie is 1776 or The Hessian Renegades. That's another version of America in which the Hessians are the Germans that were siding with the British, who were paying them money from the crown to take America back to the crown, and America was fighting for its freedom. America in the War for Independence, which America is coming out very soon. It looked like America, I'm not sure what year it came out, but it's coming up soon. It's like in the 1920s. And it's like after Orphans of the Storm even. And it gets very political and very historical. So we'll have to pay attention to those contexts, because not just George Washington owning a slave, but him crossing the Delaware, him being this larger-than-life hero character. It's the only George Washington movie where he slices down a cherry tree, admits to it in the same shot. He throws his axe and it knocks over a cherry tree. I mean, it's got it all. It's got George Washington hiding the paintings at the White House, rolling them up and putting them in his shirt, and burning fake ones, so it looks like the White House has been destroyed. And they keep shooting at it, and he's like, well, it's destroyed, and then stop shooting at it. Too bad that wasn't a sound film. There hasn't really been a wilder movie about the Revolutionary War, but you can already see Griffith still atoning and apologizing, like it's almost overkill that he's atoning and apologizing now, but still, it helps his career to atone and apologize for birth, because every second of the way they're going, oh, this is another Birth of a Nation. He's just crossing wires with the Revolutionary War now, and now he's going to tell it in this shocking kind of way, and in a way this reminds me of Stanley Kubrick, who's got the subject matter long before paved out. How he's going to make it in the most controversial way, so everybody will see it and see it being controversial. How he's going to make it in this sort of cinema destroying itself kind of way, this nostalgic, self-reflexive, like modernism of Kubrick is seen in his films. But it's not accidental that the Kubrick film, The Shining, had a scene taken right out of Broken Blossoms, where the Irish guy axes his way in. It's the Here's Johnny scene on The Shining, and there's a comparison of those scenes online that you should check out. It's between, or if you put in Broken Blossoms with The Shining, you can watch back to back the clips that are being aped by Kubrick in the Griffith sense, and that's because they went for cinema for the sake of cinema. Here I am talking about all these race cards, and really all Griffith was concerned with was making a great film. Yeah, DJ Spooky saw all the hierarchies in Griffith's Birth of a Nation and said, they're dangerous. It's a dangerous way to make a movie. But Griffith said, let's make it dangerous, because that's the way to make films for the sake of films. Dangerous, unwieldy, full of racial problems and class differences, and epics so that they're so big that none of the audience will object. Cannonballs flying everywhere. War's pieces. I mean, you have that scene with War's pieces is weird that they're just bodies desecrated all over a battlefield in Birth of a Nation, where the guy threw the Confederate flag into the cannon. He had to run it across the field, and he puts the Confederate flag in that cannon, and then he gets shot and has to go to the hospital, and is barely saved because his girlfriend is there from the north, and it's a northern hospital, and he still gets relieved and sent back to the south, and then they somehow get together. And I'm not telling you to watch it, but it is a handbook as to how to direct a movie, and it's a horrible way to tell a story, but a heck of a way to direct a story. So, we'll be with you next Masterclass. We took a little extra time. We'll see you sometime this week or next week. Don't work too hard. Just remember, the mystery is never solved in this class, but we'd love to give it a go if we can. I mean, who else could try? All right, let's do this. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.